252 million years ago, Earth did not just experience a bad day. It experienced a complete biological collapse. Scientists call it the Great Dying. It was the absolute worst catastrophe in the 4.5 billion year history of life on this planet. Over 96% of all marine species vanished forever. On land, 7 out of every 10 species of plants, insects, and animals were wiped out. Forests rotted, oceans turned to warm, lifeless acid, and the sky filled with toxic gas. The planet became a furnace. And yet, if you traced your family tree all the way back through deep geological time, through millions of generations, you will find a single unbroken line of survivors. Your ancestors walked through that hellscape. They breathed poisoned air, felt scorching ground beneath their feet, and somehow, against every statistical impossibility, did not die out. What secret traits allowed a handful of strange, unpretentious creatures to survive an apocalypse that crushed massive predators and giant armored reptiles? To understand how our ancestors made it through, you have to understand the sheer scale of the hell that broke loose. It started in modern-day Siberia, where a massive plume of mantle material punched through the Earth's crust, opening volcanic fissures known as the Siberian Traps. It was a continent-sized tear in the crust that poured out molten basalt continuously for over 1 million years. The volume of lava was enough to submerge the entire surface of the United States under a layer of liquid rock a mile deep. Worst of all, this lava erupted directly through ancient coal beds and salt deposits. It set the underground world on fire, vaporizing gigatons of coal and releasing vast amounts of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect exploded out of control. Global temperatures shot up by 10 degrees Celsius in a geological blink. Near the equator, ocean temperatures topped 40 degrees Celsius, over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The seas became as warm as a hot tub, losing their ability to hold oxygen. Without oxygen, marine life choked to death on a global scale. Anaerobic bacteria took over the oceans, belching vast clouds of deadly hydrogen sulfide gas into the air. Hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten eggs, but in high concentrations it is as deadly as cyanide. It stripped away the protective ozone layer, allowing lethal ultraviolet radiation to scorch the surface. Rain became as acidic as lemon juice, dissolving plant leaves and stripping forests down to bare mud. The global food web disintegrated into ash. Before the crash, the land was dominated by absolute titans. There were gorgonopsians, bear-sized predators with 8-inch saber teeth that stalked the floodplains. There were scutosaurs, massive tank-like plant eaters covered in heavy armor plates. They were the apex rulers of their era, built to dominate a lush Permian world. But when the Great Dying hit, their huge size and specialized diets became a death sentence. They needed massive amounts of food and oxygen to survive. Within a few thousand years, every single one of them was gone. So who survived? Who was the creature that carried the torch for our entire evolutionary lineage? Meet your ancestor, a creature called Lystrosaurus, alongside a few small, obscure relatives known as cynodonts. Lystrosaurus did not look like an action hero. It was about the size of a pig, with a stocky body, short, powerful legs, a stubby tail, and a funny downturned face featuring a turtle-like beak and 2 small tusks. It belonged to a group called synapsids, often referred to as proto-mammals. They were not reptiles and not quite mammals yet, but held the genetic blueprints for everything we are today. On paper, Lystrosaurus looked like a biological underdog. It was not fast, fierce, or armored. But when the sky turned black and the ground turned to ash, Lystrosaurus possessed a set of bizarre evolutionary adaptations that made it virtually indestructible. First, Lystrosaurus was a master burrower. Its front limbs were exceptionally strong, angled inward, and equipped with thick, heavy claws. Its entire skeleton was built like a compact bulldozer. When the surface of the Earth became a wasteland of acid rain, fires, and unbearable solar radiation, Lystrosaurus did not stay above ground. It dug deep into the Earth. Soil is an extraordinary insulator. Just a few feet beneath the surface, the temperature drops dramatically and remains stable. While the air above was choked with smoke, dust, and poisonous gases, the air inside a subterranean burrow stayed relatively cool and breathable. By spending the worst spikes of the crisis underground, our ancestors sat out the destruction in natural fallout shelters. Second, they had a secret weapon inside their chests, a radically modified respiratory system. As forests rotted and ocean oxygen levels collapsed, atmospheric oxygen on land plunged from 30% down to a suffocating 12%. Breathing at sea level during the Great Dying felt like trying to breathe at the summit of Mount Everest today. Lystrosaurus was ready for it. Fossils show that Lystrosaurus had an unusually deep, broad, barrel-shaped chest cavity holding massive, highly efficient lungs. Furthermore, its nasal passages were structured to humidify and filter dry, dusty air. While other large land animals choked and suffocated on thin, toxic air, Lystrosaurus had the lung machinery to pull enough oxygen out of every shallow breath. Third was their diet. Before the extinction, big herbivores were picky eaters, relying on lush fern forests and soft canopy leaves. When those forests withered, those animals starved. But Lystrosaurus was a complete generalist. Its powerful jaw muscles operated a hard keratin beak that worked like heavy shears. It could slice through tough roots, underground tubers, decaying plant matter, and scrubby weeds. If it was organic, Lystrosaurus could grind it up and extract nutrients from it. And finally, they bred like crazy. Fossil bone analysis reveals that Lystrosaurus grew fast and reached reproductive age early. Instead of living long lives and taking years to raise offspring like giant Permian beasts, Lystrosaurus lived fast and bred young. When environmental shocks wiped out adult populations, a species that reproduces early can rebuild its numbers at extraordinary speed. What happened next is one of the most absurd chapters in the history of life. When the dust finally settled and the worst of the extinction passed, the world was empty. Almost everything else was dead. But Lystrosaurus was still here. With no predators left to hunt them and no competitors for food, Lystrosaurus emerged from their burrows and inherited the Earth. They spread across every single continent on the supercontinent Pangaea. Scientists digging up early Triassic fossil beds in Antarctica, South Africa, China, and Russia keep finding the exact same creature over and over again. In fact, in some early Triassic rock layers, up to 90% of all vertebrate skeletons belong to Lystrosaurus. Imagine walking across the Earth today, and 9 out of every 10 land animals you see is the exact same species. Lystrosaurus became the most dominant land animal in Earth's history, bridging the gap between total disaster and a new world. Sitting alongside Lystrosaurus were smaller, more mammalian relatives called cynodonts, like Thrinaxodon. These tiny, ferret-like burrowers were taking the next big evolutionary step in our lineage, developing warm-blooded metabolism, whisker pits, and early forms of fur. Their small size allowed them to survive on tiny scraps of food, insect life, and detritus that survived in the ruins of the global ecosystem. Over millions of years, the world slowly recovered. The climate stabilized, and new plant life returned. The descendants of Lystrosaurus eventually faded away, making room for the rise of the dinosaurs. But the small, warm-blooded cynodonts stayed in the shadows, keeping their heads down, nursing their young with milk, and refining their senses under the cover of night. They carried with them the ultimate survival kit forged in the fires of the Great Dying. The high-efficiency lungs, the warm-blooded metabolism, the adaptable diets, and the instinct to dig deep when the world above collapses. All of these traits were polished to perfection during Earth's darkest hour. When you look at your hands, feel your heartbeat, or take a deep breath of crisp morning air, you are using hardware stress-tested in an apocalyptic furnace 252 million years ago. You do not come from a line of fragile creatures that had it easy. Every single one of your ancestors was an unbroken chain of ultimate survivors. They dug into the earth, held their breath through the toxic dark, and waited for the morning to come back.